Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the 9th session in the Spring 2026 SunoikisisDC program. This semester, we're on the theme of digital approaches to cultural heritage, and this is the final session in this semester. There's another semester starting again in just a few weeks' time, run by colleagues in Leipzig and Cologne, so don't be too bereft, we'll be back. This session touches on various themes that have been set up or previously introduced in other sessions. So we've had sessions on 3D imaging, 3D modeling. We've had sessions on the ethics of 3D and other aspects of cultural heritage. And so in this session, we'll be talking about virtual reality, virtual environments, and various opportunities for virtual exhibits in cultural heritage and similar topics. And we're delighted to have two experts in this area talking to us today. Lynn Verschuren from the University of Glasgow and Juliette Quatre, just arrived at the University of London, will be giving us a general sort of theoretical introduction and also some concrete case studies and some interesting stuff to look at, and also a suggested exercise that people can take away and try out afterwards. If you're watching this live on YouTube, please feel free to use the live chat feature to the right to ask questions or make any comments as we go along, and we'll pick up questions at the end. Also use them to say hi as we, at the start. Tell us who you are and where you're watching from. It's always nice to know who's around. If you're not watching us live, you can't use the live feature to chat, but we'd be very happy to hear from you. And if you have any questions, do feel free to get in touch in the future. Depending on how far in the future we may still remember what we were talking about. Yes. Otherwise, I think I will hand over to our speakers, and I believe you did tell me, and I may now have gotten this wrong, but Lynn is going first.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Okay. In that case, I'll hand over to Lynn.
Yes. Thank you so much. Can you see my slides just now?
Yes, we can now. Yeah.
Good. Perfect. So thank you, first of all, so much for having me. I'm really excited. As Gabby was saying, my name is Lynn Verschuren. I'm one of the research associates on Museums in the Metaverse. It is a research project currently led at the University of Glasgow. So I'm very, very excited to be joining from a surprisingly sunny Glasgow today. So to start off, Juliette and I will be looking at VR and virtual environments. And this is what the session will look like. So I will start and kick off this session by giving you a brief introduction into virtual reality. So we'll be having a very quick look at its history and evolution, and then we will be looking at virtual reality for cultural heritage collections and sites specifically. That will be the point where Juliette will be taking over. So she will be looking at some of the theoretical approaches. We'll then have 3 case studies that she will introduce, and I will finish off with introducing museums and the metaverse. And if we then have time, hopefully we will have a chance to do a bit of a discussion and maybe answer some of the questions that you'll have. So VR itself has a very long and complex history, and the concept can be traced back to the 19th century. However, the technology that approximates really contemporary understandings of VR is more recent and goes back to the mid-20th century. So for today's talk, I would like to start in the 1960s. Oh, I see there's already, there we go. Oh, apologies. I think I got these names switched up. Apologies. So we'll be starting with Ivan Sutherland, who developed one of the very first head-mounted VR devices, which he called the Sword of Damocles. Now you can see that photo of it in the right-hand corner. So I say head-mounted, but it was really actually way too heavy to be worn by users, and it had to be suspended from the ceiling. So not only was it thus not feasible to be worn, but the visuals were also quite poor. So you only could see little green lines, that roughly matched something in the world. And that meant that the contraption, if you will, never was really used beyond the lab, as part of which it was developed. Now, by the 1980s, things start becoming more interesting. So again, this should say Jaron Lanier, not even Sutherland. I got this mixed up, so I'll make sure we'll get that fixed for you as well. But Jaron Lanier, he's often credited with having coined and later popularized the term virtual reality. And it was him who started one of the very first VR companies, which he called VPL, which stood for Virtual Programming Languages. And it was one of the very first companies that really developed and sold virtual reality products. So he was really a true visionary. And between the early and late 80s, he developed kits that looked remarkably like the ones that we do have today, including the iPhone, so EYE phone, and accompanying gloves. And you can see those on those photos here. Now, it's developments by Lanier and others that really set the stage for the 1990s, and that is really where we see images like the ones here, that is very expensive contraption still, and children would really nag their parents to get on and regret it instantly, so they would be very clunky, very much nausea-inducing, so it's no surprise really that types like these didn't really persist, but it's still a very interesting glimpse into how people thought about VR in the 90s. And some of you might have seen those still, in some of the arcades, at least a few decades ago, we could encounter these as well. Fast forward to about 2013, and we literally get a phone in a box. So we have cardboard boxes like the ones from Google, or this one that you can see on the screen from Samsung. So in the grand scheme of things, this might seem very simple, but the idea behind it was actually quite clever. So phones have the capacity to register where they are and what orientation they are. So if you harness a phone's power to track where you are looking, combine it with the phone's graphic power and strap it close enough on someone's head, it will really give you the sense that you're actually looking around. Okay, so the problem is that when you take a step forward, it doesn't really know. So it only knows if you're rotating your head. So it knows if you're looking up, if you're looking down, if you're looking left or right, but it doesn't register movement. So that is known as 3 degrees of freedom. So not 6 degrees of freedom, on which we'll get to a second, but still this was already quite cool and very impressive, that the simple thought that a phone that you carry around with you in your pocket could be transformed, by simply sticking it into a box. Now, 2016 is really when things start taking off, and that is called the second evolution of VR, as we know it today, and that is really where consumer devices were becoming much more affordable. I say much or more or less affordable, as high quality headsets at that point started around £300 to £500, but they were reliant on PCs and laptops that would cost you over £1,000. So yes, maybe more affordable, but still quite a big investment. Now, if indeed you were willing to spend that money, your experience would get much higher as well. The Vive, for example, that you can see on the screen here, had pretty much unrestrained 6 degrees of freedom. So you could walk, rotate, jump, anything, and it would track you within millimeters of accuracy. So really, suddenly, we get equipment that allows for quite compelling experiences. Unfortunately, most people's first try of kit like this, and it was indeed my first experience as well, was using virtual roller coasters. Okay, and I'm sure we've all seen videos of these online. It's quite funny to look at, but the reality is that it is one of the worst things that you can do in terms of user experience of a virtual environment. Now, because why am I saying that? It's because the virtual roller coaster, it does persuade your eyes and ears that you are moving really fast, but your inner ear actually knows better. And that is where you start feeling nauseous. So the result of that and these poor experiences is that now people run around thinking that VR is actually something that will make you sick quite fast. But what you have to bear in mind that is much more user or an error of how the technology was used rather than an error in the technology itself. Now, we do obviously know that users with certain medical conditions do indeed struggle with VR, even as the technology becomes better and experiences become more advanced. What we also know is that women encounter such problems much more often than men, and it scales with age. So the elderly women feel it much more often than younger men, for example. There's actually at the moment a quite interesting research project here at Glasgow, which experiments and investigates exactly why that is the problem. And what they're seeming to find is that the more stable an experience is, and the better the headset is, the lower the percentage of users that experiences issues. So that is, I think, a quite interesting takeaway if you should ever plan or design virtual experiences yourself. Now, in terms of state of the art, over the last 10 years, we have really seen new developments and drops all over the place. So it would take us hours to really explore each of these in turn. What is important to point out is that over the last years, especially, we increasingly see standalone headsets. So while in 2016, as I was saying, you could headsets for £500, but needed an expensive PC or gaming laptop. Today, £500 gets you one that doesn't require a headset, and it allows you to walk around in 6 degrees of freedom. And when you put it on, you can still see the actual real world in color and actually quite high fidelities. In terms of future looking, so prototypes for the next 2 or 3 years really promised that kit is just getting smaller, lighter, cheaper, with better graphics. So not least, we see that with the wearables, Meta glasses, for instance. So what we'll see is something, or increasingly tech, that will seamlessly integrate into everyday life. Now, of course, some of you may think of this as slightly dystopian, others more excited about opportunities, but I really let you be to judge of that. So in terms of features or the defining characteristics of VR, and those are all some that I would like you to keep in mind as we look into the case studies shortly. So the way I think about VR is that it entails computer-generated environments and objects. So even if an environment was original photographs or laser scans or 360 video, the content really and the objects populating the spaces are relayed to you via a computer. So that means that you can have a lot of variation of where you find yourselves, but also what can happen to you in these scenarios. VR also gives you a sense of depth and 3D that you cannot get otherwise. Now, one of the first virtual experiences that I can remember is called The Blue. Now, for that one, you would stand at the bottom of the sea and look up as a blue whale was swimming above you. So we all have heard, obviously, of how big whales are and how impressive their size, but not all of us get a chance to experience that in real time, and to really actually feel the size of a whale in comparison to our own. And VR really lets you do that quite powerfully. That sense of depth is where that sense of immersion comes in. So users actually often forget that they are actually not in the space that they see. And that is why we need, especially for deployments, to be very careful about any trip hazards. If you're moving around in the space and there is, whether that is pets or little things that lie around, we really need to be careful about those. And also, obviously, the cables, make sure we don't get tangled in that. VR can also be very much isolating, just by the simple fact that you have to wear headsets, right? There are, of course, a lot of experiences or cases in which you would use multiplayer experiences whilst in VR, and that not least for gaming. But the fact remains that when you put on a headset, you automatically remove yourself from your immediate surroundings. So in comparison to obviously AR or augmented reality, where you overlay information and you can look at the objects and through a tablet, for instance, for VR, you're quite literally isolated. Then again, isolation is why it's so immersive, obviously. So that is something that you have the good and the bad together. But I think there's something that you have to bear in mind, especially when you come to think about use of VR in museums and cultural heritage context, which are, as we know, predominantly social experiences. VR can also be disorienting now. I touched upon that slightly earlier. And that is one of the reasons, obviously, as I was saying, that we don't quite literally know sometimes where we are in the room. But also as you come out, now we found in our own research that we always take a lot of time, taking care about onboarding our users. So being careful that they are safe, that they've been talked through all the experiences they're having, and that they feel comfortable. But we're finding more and more that some users need to reacclimatize, if you will, with the surroundings when they come out of VR. So this idea of offboarding and allowing, users a wee breather after, or take a seat or something, maybe a glass of water, is also something that you have to bear in mind while you're using VR. Now, these benefits and kind of drawbacks in mind, obviously the potentials for VR for research, presentation, interpretation of heritage sites and objects is pretty much limitless. And it is at this point where I would like to pass over to Juliette, and she can tell you some more about the case studies that she's chosen to present today.
Hi everyone. I don't know if you can see my slides right now. I hope so.
Yes, I can now.
Yeah, all good? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So yes, before talking a little bit more about VR, so my research focuses in archaeology on the reconstruction of ancient sites and on the relationship, especially between sacred architecture in the context of Greco-Egyptian cults and the behavior of worshippers who would have visited the sanctuary. So I know it's quite specific, but I'll try to stay general for the purpose of this session, although I do have a case study on that. So Lynn has explained everything really well, so I don't really need to go over the VR methods again. It was really great. Thank you, Lynn. But before talking a little bit more about VR, I would like to talk a little bit about the perception of space by people that people had, and also what kind of behaviors they could have depending on the different types of space, because that has been theorized in the past decades, and it has produced some very interesting results and debates, because not everyone always agrees. So for that, we need to go back to theoretical backgrounds for a moment, especially related to GIS and 3D. I know that you had 2 sessions dedicated on that, so I won't expand too much either. I want to keep it brief. But GIS and 3D reconstructions have played a key role in the recording, analyzing and interpretation of ancient sites, and the past realities, the ancient realities as well. They give us very, very interesting information. It's mostly about interpretation of archaeological data, so there is caution to be applied there. But I'll focus on the human use and perception of space right now for the purpose of the session. So it has been defined by a number of influential scholars. I will cite Edward Hall. You can find his book in the list of references in the last slide. So his book, The Hidden Dimension, which is quite interesting, and he basically theorizes how spaces can be divided and how people move in those spaces. And The Hidden Dimension focuses on social spaces. So it focuses on not only human behaviors in the spaces, but also social interactions in the spaces. And I will also rely on another book, Spatial Analysis and Social Spaces. edited by Eleftheria Paliou, Undine Leibowitz, Sylvia Polo, which was published in 2014. I think I remember, yeah, 2014. Also in the list of publications at the end in the last slide. And in the first chapter of this book, David Whitley basically develops the theories and techniques related to space syntax, which is a very important tool that you probably heard of during your GIS session. Making space an active agent in human activities. So not only considering space as a background, but also participating in those interactions and behaviors, and also offering a live setting and also influencing those behaviors. So Whitley relies on two propositions. The first one, that each kind of human interaction has its own geometry, and there is a difference in the configuration of human movements and interactions within the space they occupy. So that's a very important concept. And the second one is that the space is configurational, which means that it directly takes part in the shaping of human interactions, as we can see in the left figure that I've included in the slide. And another important concept is Edward Hall's definition of proxemic spaces that you can find on the right side, on the left side, sorry, of this slide. We have here a division of the spaces according to reaction bubbles. So you can clearly see that you have one person in the middle, and a division of space depending on the distance. So depending on the distance at which an object or another person will find themselves, the person in the middle will have a different perception and interaction as well. And that is something that is quite essential when studying ancient spaces, but also reconstructing them and then experiencing them through VR. That's my point here. So yeah, you must be wondering why I went so far into theory, but I really want to mention those two concepts because they're really important. And they help us understanding better how both ancient and modern spaces are constructed, both, you know, as physical environments, but also in our minds. So I should also make a disclaimer, is that when reconstructing ancient spaces, there's a high risk of error sometimes, depending on how we interpret data. But we'll try to navigate those things, don't worry. That's something that is always to be taken into account. So this is a larger process. I would like to mention this process, the process of making, sorry, this one. Yes, that's the one. The process that begins at data collection and then ends with virtual reality. So we need to consider all of it in order to better understand the goals and how we can best experience ancient buildings and objects when using VR. So it starts with data collection in the field. It can be raw data, so plans, photographs, drawings, measurements, you know, that anything that you can basically gather with specialist equipment on the field. It can also be publications that you can rely on, fieldwork, conference proceedings, books, articles, detailing not only the process of excavations of data collection, but also the interpretation that the scholars sometimes have of the sites that they're studying. So that's quite interesting. Then you have the interpretation. So before even modeling, before even starting about modeling, starting thinking about modeling, you have to interpret what kind of, you know, the data that you have at hand. Even if it's already interpreted, sometimes you know, you can notice with all of the research that you've done, you can also notice things that you can also gather more data, additional data even later. So that's also quite important. And then when you actually make a 3D model, I know that you had a session on it. I don't want to expand too much, but having a 3D model allows you to not only interpret the data that you have, whether you gathered it yourself or not, but it also helps you analyze the reality of the site that you're presenting. And you have to keep in mind that modeling will not always be accurate, but you have to be as specific as you can and as close to the reality as you can. That's the goal. So you can also have different types of models. Let me just go back one slide. There you go. You have, I consider a spectrum between photogrammetric models, so models that sometimes require specialist equipment, but sometimes you can just do it with your phone for smaller objects. Photogrammetry, I mean, I'm sure you've explored that as well. I don't want to go over it again, but photogrammetry only necessitates images of the actual object, so it will never show, how the object would have looked, or the building. When I say object, it's either object or building, but it will never show how the object would have looked at a certain point in time. It just shows how the object looks when you're looking at it. And having photogrammetric models is very useful for a number of reasons. And to do that, you need to capture every angle of the object or the building, which is quite interesting in itself as an exercise. But the other end of the spectrum is quite interesting because it is a full 3D reconstruction, a complete 3D reconstruction. And that's where the interpretation comes in as well, the interpretation of data. And that's where you can also have risks of speculation or errors. But you might have errors, but the goal is just to try and minimize them as best as you can. So 3D reconstructions, you usually you can start with a plan. You can start with all the data you have. You can start with the measurements, and then you manually reconstruct everything in specialized software such as Blender, SketchUp, even AutoCAD. I think they do have an option to do 3D modeling. So that's quite interesting. And in between, you can have a number of different applications in between those two extremities. So you can integrate photogrammetric models inside 3D reconstructions that you made, just to show, for example, if you have a sanctuary, you can show dedications that were in that sanctuary. If you still have the objects, if the objects survived, so you can make photogrammetric models of them and then integrate them into this larger reconstruction, which is quite interesting in itself as well. So complete reconstructions, you can apply VR to pretty much any type of model that you have. You can do VR in photogrammetric models, you can do VR in reconstructions, and you can do VR in all of the models that you have in between. It doesn't really matter. It's quite interesting. Actually, I think it's more interesting if you have a model that combines different methods, so photogrammetry and reconstruction, and then do VR in it, so you can actually see what the objects are in the setting that they would have been in. I think that's the best you can have given the circumstances. It also depends heavily on the state of the site that you're studying or trying to reconstruct. Some sites, are really, really well preserved or even were partially reconstructed, which in this case can really help you. Others are very fragmentary, and sometimes it's too fragmentary to even reconstruct. So that's where interpretation comes in. So yes, so it's quite interesting to reconstruct everything, but do keep in mind that not everything is going to be true. When doing 3D reconstructions and then applying VR, we're trying also to reconstruct experiences, and how trying to reconstruct and visualize how people would have moved in the sites by doing it yourself, which is really, really good in itself. There have been, and there are studies currently being led with, you know, eye catching and movement catching devices that allow data recording on, you know, how people currently react to certain elements in the environment. So if, for example, if you enter in a room in a sanctuary, a decorated room, you know, it can be measured. People can measure, you know, what you're going to look at first, and then, you know, where your eyes are going to wander around the room. So that is quite interesting, and there have been studies. There's an exhibition right now in Dublin that just at the Chester Beatty Museum. They're doing eye-catching movement, which is quite interesting, but they're doing it on manuscript, so it's slightly different. It's not really archaeology, but it's still related, so I think it's important to mention it. I think you can have access to it on the website. I'll try to see if I can find a link somewhere on the internet. But yes, so that's the different kind of models that you can have for your virtual reality. Yes, sadly, doing virtual reality it reconstructs experiences, but it only reconstructs a certain type of experiences. And by that I mean it can only reconstruct vision. So for example, in recent scholarship in archaeology and everything related to 3D GIS and sensory archaeology, there have been criticisms regarding the heavy focus on trying to reconstruct vision and how people would have visually experienced specific features and buildings at the expense of other senses. Equally, it's quite hard to reconstruct other sensory experiences related to other senses, such as smell, touch, taste, sound. Although there is an interesting series of books that have been trying to do that on paper, and it's quite interesting. I will mention it. I will include it later in the references. It's so you have books on sight and the ancient sense and the ancient senses. You have also smell and the ancient senses, touch and taste, and they're all made of chapters and studies on how to reconstruct those experiences, but also how people would have actually used them in different contexts. It can be in domestic context, it can be social context, it can be in religious context as well. But in virtual reality, you can't really reconstruct all of those, sadly. Although you could theoretically, with experimental archaeology, you could add, you know, different approaches as well and different elements. But that would be slightly different logistically. So yes, so let's move on to the first case study, which is the Serapion Sea on Delos that I have reconstructed for my research. I have included in all of my slides 2 different versions. I mean, it's actually the same version that I built on Sketchfab, but on SketchUp, sorry. But I want to show you the importance of visualization. So I have included the same model in Sketchfab and in Unreal Engine, which is a game engine, and you can clearly see the difference between the two. Now, I won't be able to do a live demo on VR, sadly, but I'll try my best to reconstruct it by means of speech. So this is the model. You can see it from above. Now, I would like to say that I have tried the VR option in Unreal, and it is much less user-friendly than Sketchfab. So I would try to stay on Sketchfab for now, because it is much easier to use and to navigate as well with the headset. So I reconstructed this site, which is a Greco-Egyptian sanctuary located on Delos. In activity between the end of the 3rd century BC until the end of the 1st century BC, basically. And it was it has many different versions throughout time, because it was heavily modified throughout time, especially when the Romans arrived. But this is a reconstruction of the sanctuary as it was supposedly during the 1st century BC. So I used all the publications, I used the plans. It was very interesting as a process, I have to say. So now you can see the sanctuary. For the elevation and everything, the elevation of the buildings, I looked at other buildings on Delos and reconstructed it, but I am aware that it might not be perfect. It is certainly not perfect. So this is the sanctuary. In Sketchfab, it is possible to navigate it, using the VR headset. It's quite interesting. You use the joystick to move. Now, what I have done is I have used the MetaQuest headset, and you can access 3D models. This one is not accessible, sadly, on Sketchfab for everyone, but you can access a number of other models available on Sketchfab directly from the browser and the headset, and that's very quick, actually. And then you can just move around with the joystick. You just point at a location where you want to move. If you try to move yourself, if you try to walk with this type of headset, unfortunately there is a security perimeter which is predefined. Well, I mean, unfortunately, it is pretty good, actually, because it stops you from walking into walls and other things. So as soon as you go beyond that perimeter, the model will just fade away, and the headset will show you what is actually around you, just like a normal set of glasses, which is actually really, really good, because if it was my case at first, I tended to forget to use the joystick. I would just tend to get carried away by the experience and just walk myself in the sanctuary, and then a table would come in my field of vision, which is actually really, really good, because it prevents you from hurting yourself. So that's a very interesting feature in the headset. So this is the sanctuary. I've tried to reproduce the walkthrough of the sanctuary. You can clearly see the differences. In a game engine, you can also emulate the atmosphere. So with the sunlight, you can also, have different weather conditions. I used a basic one because I didn't want to fiddle with it too much. But this is closer to reality, I want to say. So the question of immersion is quite interesting, and in some GIS software, so like ArcGIS Pro, you can even have a simulation of the blur that you have from a distance. So, for example, an object that is 3 meters away from you won't be very blurry, but if you have an object that is, or a building that is, 150 meters away, it will start getting blurry. And you can also do that in ArcGIS, although it's not VR, but it's also quite good. So this is a view from the Stoa in the northern courtyard. Again, having a VR headset also allows you to experience it in real life, I want to say, and walk yourself and experience the architecture, which is quite interesting. Given the complex architecture of this site, it has, let me just go back. Yes, this is the main dromos. You have a southern entrance behind that little building there. It's surrounded by a portico, and you have the dromos, and right behind me, basically, you have the northern courtyard. There you go. You have the temples. Yes, that's the view from inside the temple. So when you're wearing a VR headset, it's quite interesting to actually walk inside the temple. I wish I could have integrated photogrammetric models of the cult statues. Unfortunately, for a number of reasons, that was impossible, but it's always something to consider. When you have a model like that, it's always interesting to see if you can add anything that was actually found on site and was actually preserved. So yes, that's it. Let's move on to the second case study. It's not really VR related, but I wanted it I wanted to include it for a number of reasons. It's the Swedish Pompeii project. You have access. They have a website that you can access. This is the screenshot of the website. It's developed by Lund University, and there is a number of publications that are included also in my list of references by Niccolò Dell'Unto, Giacomo Landeschi, and others. And they basically have scanned an entire insula to make a photogrammetric model of it. And in some of the publications, they actually added reconstructed elements to that with more detail. So it's quite interesting. There's no VR option on the website, but I thought it would be interesting to integrate it into this session. Mainly for the purpose of looking at ancient architecture, architecture that has survived, and the process of trying to reconstruct it and add missing elements from interpretation and archaeological data as well, and by comparison, to other sites. So that is quite interesting. This is different buildings taken from the insula, but as you can see from this screenshot, the model is quite big. It's massive actually. And you can actually navigate it. You can navigate this one, which is the general one. And you can also, on the website, let me see. On the website, if you click on 3D models and 3D GIS, it gives you all the different models of the different buildings belonging to the same insula separately. So that's quite good. And that's what I was able to do right there. Sadly, there's no VR applications to it yet, but maybe they will try to do something like that. But in terms of recording and preserving ancient architecture, it's quite perfect really. And that brings us to the third case study, which this one integrates VR. Iconem. I don't know if any one of you has heard about Iconem before. It's basically a company that is based in France, and they do a lot of projects. This is a screenshot of their website as well. You can Google them. They have a huge number of projects, not only in France, but also around the Mediterranean, in Africa, in Asia, I think even. So it's quite interesting. And they do photogrammetry of different sites. They do exhibitions as well. I remember in 2016 they did a massive exhibition on Palmyra because they were able to visit the site, and they actually projected models of the site on the walls of the exhibition room. So that was quite immersive, although not VR technically, but quite immersive. So this is Palmyra, the third case study. This site has been unfortunately heavily damaged by ISIS. It has been bombed and destroyed and attacked, and some of it even sold on the black market, sadly. But at some point, the Iconem team was able to visit the site and actually record as much as they could with drones and specialist equipment. They took a lot of photogrammetric models, and they even did this one, which you can visit. This one is free to access on Sketchfab. I will include the link. I will include the link in one of my slides or on the website. Don't worry. But basically, what you can do with this one, if you want to have a little exercise, you can try to access it either with a VR headset if you have one around, or even with your phone. It is one of the arches on the side of Palmyra, and sadly it was destroyed, as you can see. There's a lot of debris still, but Iconem has done what we called a digital anastylosis, which means that they've reconstructed some of the architecture just as it looked like, while also showing what is missing. So it's quite interesting because you get to see different moments in time on the same site, and if you experience it in VR, it is quite spectacular because you get to look around. It can be quite fiddly at first. It can be quite shaky if you move your head around, but it is very interesting because you get to look around, and I do have annotations on this model, giving you details about the different architectural elements of the sites, which is really, really good because you get to learn a lot about it. And it shows, although it's not perfect, because in a perfect world, I mean, it wouldn't have been destroyed like that, but obviously it shows you what you can do, especially with endangered sites, and how useful 3D modeling and VR can be to reconstruct or even preserve the images and the state of ancient sites when you have them, as long as you have them. This is another one, very, very interesting. It's the tetrapelon. And this one is quite different from the arch because the tetrapelon here, you can see, surrounded by red lines, basically in red, is the different elements of the tetrapelon reconstructed, so before destruction. And next to them are actually the columns and the different architectural elements destroyed. So you have two different moments in time. You have before the destruction and you have after the destruction, which allows you to, you know, observe it yourself, experience it yourself as well. So you can also do that. You can also access it with a VR headset, or even on your phone. That's really good. Let me just have a quick word on how to access all of that in VR. If you'd like to try it, you can either do it on a mobile phone with a cardboard. So you just need to open this link, and then Sketchfab will guide you. And you just need to place your mobile phone in the cardboard, and then the cardboard on your nose, basically, before your eyes, which is it's quite good, I have to say. You don't necessarily need a VR headset for that. It really works. I've tried it before. It really works. So that's one of the easiest ways. You can also, it's quite complicated. You can also pair, that's the second solution, pair your desktop or your PC with a VR headset, and then project it in the headset directly. What I do usually is that I access Sketchfab directly in the browser in the headset, because the headset is usually equipped with a web browser, so that's quite straightforward. And you just click on it and it just appears, and then you can move around and experience the architecture yourself. And that's it, I think. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. This is the references. I can this is the main references I have. A few about the Pompeii project, a few about the perceptions of space and how space is defined around us and how we define space in our minds as well, because that's quite interesting. That also defines social interactions in spaces, but I don't want to expand too much on that. But there you go. Yeah, over to you, Gabby or Lynn, if you have anything to add, or even if you have questions yourselves.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. All of those references, by the way, are also in the session page,
Yeah.
which are, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, they're linked in the description of the video underneath the video. There's a link to the session page, and all of those references are in there, including the links and everything. So, but back to Lynn again, I think.
Yes, thank you so much. So for a fourth case study, slightly archaeology adjacent, so we'll slightly move to the realm of virtual museums. So the museums, the project I wanted to introduce really briefly is called Museums in the Metaverse. As I was saying, that is the project that I'm working on at the moment. So Museums in the Metaverse is a 3-year UK-funded project led by the University of Glasgow in collaboration with Edify. the Hunterian, the National Museum Scotland, and Historic Environment Scotland. The list of partners has since expanded to include not least St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh and also National Portrait Gallery in London. Now, the project really aims to make good on the economic promise of XR and VR for the cultural heritage sector. Now, what do I mean by economic promise, and why is it so crucial for us to unlock that? Now, we know that museums have huge economic and cultural importance. So in the UK alone, cultural tourism is worth about 18.5 billion per year. Interestingly, Glasgow gets about 10% of that, despite having only 2% of the population. So that's an interesting tidbit there. But museums, as we know, are also very much physically constrained. So the vast majority of objects are in storage. So research has shown that between 90 and 95% of the world collections are not on display, because there's just isn't enough space. And even if museums did have all the space in the world, we would still be faced with the fact that many, if not most people, will not be able to visit and see these collections firsthand. Now, that can be financial barriers, cultural barriers, and also physical barriers that will impede many from seeing either their own or other people's cultural heritage. But objects themselves are also sensitive. So from a conservation point of view, for instance, many artifacts cannot or should not be physically handled. And even those where object movement or object loans are possible, bringing together disparate collections for special exhibitions is often very costly and often only possible for a limited time. Now, virtual museums is kind of an obvious solution to overcoming these barriers, but they also come with challenges. So we know that they cut out the physical constraints of people accessing objects, what you can do with objects, and indeed how many objects you can show them. But as I was saying, there are still challenges, not least when it comes to technology. So both on the consumer sides, I mentioned this previously, headsets are very expensive and not many people own them or indeed have them in their own home. And even if they do, they often take long to get up and running and need dedicated time and space. And we all know that we do not all have that time and space to give. But also, and importantly, on the production side. Now, we know that museums especially often lack the digital skills to develop and design platforms, often resulting in projects to being outsourced. And this obviously adds to further financial or economic barriers. Cultural heritage sector doesn't come as a surprise. It's very much struggling financially. So adapting the workforce or hiring new people is just not possible. And that is true both for the 3D capture and digitization front, but also after, in terms of how do we visualize and interpret our beautiful assets, and also in terms of app development, etc. So that is all those things that can incur extra cost. And then control is another problem now that might be slightly more a more less obvious one. But for museums especially, as the problem that arises is that what happens if we create a digital version of an object or indeed a site, publish it online for anyone to see or use, and then people start doing odd things with it? What if people, for instance, start stealing digital assets in some way? Now, that is a very big concern for a sector like the cultural heritage sector, which is full of curators whose job is to care for objects, to look after them, and the reputation of the institutions that we have been, trusted with, or that we're trusting to look after all of our common cultural property. So the shareability of digital assets is a very big problem for the sector that really prides itself on the singularity and the authenticity, if you will, of the actual real thing. And that is, I think, one of the biggest things that gets in the way of the proliferation really of virtual museums and virtual experiences. And that is really where the Museums in the Metaverse project comes in. Now, MIM is trying to address these issues by developing a two-sided, no-code and build-your-own museum platform, which allows anyone, whether you are a heritage professional, a teacher, or a hobbyist, to use the platform to create and curate your own virtual experiences and allow others to visit those, all at the click of a button without special technical skills. So you can either do that by uploading your own 3D assets. For instance, Juliette was talking about, Sketchfab, there's TurboSquid, there's plenty of other sites. Or even if you have your own 3D assets, you can upload this just into MIM. But you can also do so by browsing our own library of hundreds of cultural heritage assets from museums around the UK. You can click and choose the ones you like, choose an environment that you like, and populate it as you wish, and really tell the story in a manner that you would like to tell it in. Now, I mentioned control and the possible issues that arise when making museum objects available digitally. Now, MIM is aiming to solve that problem by introducing certain ledger mechanism that really control how an object is used when in MIM. So firstly, I want to point out that all assets are encrypted. That means that you can look and use objects in MIM, but they can never be downloaded and used out with the platform. So you couldn't, for instance, go up, download now the Lewis Chessman, and then print them off digitally or, 3D prints and then go and sell those. That will not be possible. So everything is encrypted and safe inside MIM. Secondly, and unlike other projects of this kind, the intellectual property resides completely with asset owners. So at no point do we as Museums in the Metaverse retain the rights of any of the objects uploaded. And that includes the objects that we have scanned as part of this project, which is currently over 600 artifacts from institutions across the UK. So as I was saying, intellectual property resides with the owners, and this unfortunately or fortunately is most likely the museums or the collections on which are from which the objects come from. And then thirdly, asset owners have the power of veto. That is, they control access and the use of each of their own objects. So for instance, if a user does unsavory or insensitive things with an object in MIM, which is obviously a very big possibility with any kind of user-generated content, digital asset owners can remove an object from an experience at any time or complete it from the platform completely. So what this adds up to, and that is what we call a safe digital loaning process, in which the object or the asset owner contains or retains as much control as possible. Now, I also touched on access and technology barriers before as well. I want to point out that MIM as it stands is available across platforms. So it is optimal in VR, especially for tethered PCs, because it's obviously really, those PCs are super strong and they allow us, to really show off the beauty of some of the objects we have scanned. But it's also available across formats. So you can both build and visit on your desktop, tablet and phone. And it is the idea that that is really going to help increase the reach and really diversify the audience. And then lastly, you also have the possibility with Museums in the Metaverse, if you so wish, to monetize the experience that you curate. And all income is fairly shared between asset owners, Museums in the Metaverse, and the creators, thus making it as quite a fairly shared and sustainable. Now, the result is really a platform that is aimed at democratizing access to and use of collections both on-site and remotely, that enables users to interact with objects in ways impossible in a physical museum, that that transforms possibilities for user-generated storytelling and contextualization, and with that, the unique potential to take collections-based learning and research as well as international co-curation to the next level. So just in terms of a bit of context, in terms of user research we've done to finish off, over the last 2 years especially, we had the opportunity to showcase MIM to hundreds of people, whether that was at events, conferences, or a part of our targeted user testing. But for a long time, we were limited to a simple gaming laptop and a single headset. So what we needed was an easy but fun way to bring the platform to the public. And this is how our unbox came to be. And you can see this in the couple of photos I included on the slides here. Now, the idea of the unbox is fairly simple. We identified a big appetite among current and prospective partners, as well as their audiences, for VR, but our partners often lack the financial means, for integrating and maintaining expensive kit, or indeed the space to display it. So the unbox, as you can see here, is very much a space-saving, fully movable, and crucially fully kitted VR kiosk, which our partners can display on site to complement and expand their physical collections. Between December last year and earlier this month, we deployed the unbox at 4 sites, so the Glasgow Science Centre, the Hunterian Museum here in Glasgow, St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, and also most recently at National Portrait Gallery in London. We were at each of these sites for about 2 weeks and managed to run over 1,000 user demos and together over 500 in-person service. So the public uptick and engagement has been truly incredible. And the surveys have found a 98% overall positive sentiment. So that is obviously for us quite exciting, and I'm really excited to see what the next stages of the project are. I did record a virtual walkthrough just to showcase some of the abilities of MIM. Let me see if that works. So these are some of the environments that we are developed. I thought I was very smoothly moving my head, so I do apologize. This is slightly a bit more jerky than I had anticipated, but this is one of the environments that we've developed. So that was one that we curated as part of a exhibit that we were asked to curate for Lord Kelvin's 200th birthday. So all you will then have to do is pop up the menu. This is the menu that shows environments we have. This is one of the brutalist environments that we've developed, so very much Dune inspired. As you can see, the flare, atmosphere, light in the space is quite different to the one we had looked earlier. So you can teleport throughout the space. This one is quite nice and open and leads to a bit more of a colorful third space. Again, all these environments that we currently have around 13. They are all empty as they are, so they are templates and they are fully there for you to be completing and adding your own assets in a manner that you see fit. This is one what we call traditionalist, so very much more of an Greek Roman inspired temple. Now this is showcasing the menu, so our object library, which is loading up. So there is the current assets. So all you will have to do is click and choose the ones that you like. Then they will show in your little collection of assets, and all you will have to do is pull them in. So what we are looking at here now is a tuning fork. It's one from the Hunterian Museum here in Glasgow. It would have been used by Lord Kelvin himself for acoustic demonstrations in class. So as you can see, not as smoothly again as I'd hoped, but you can really rotate them in your hand and you can see how beautifully they reflect the light. And then all you have to do is place them in a space where you would like them to adjust the size, and that is you done already. this one is an interesting one. So that is one of the many CC0 models from the Smithsonian, for instance. So some people will recognize this. So this is a uniform from Star Trek. Again, you can just move it around, adjust size, and really just decide where you want it to sit. We have plinths and other accessories that you can add if you'd like as well. But as I said, the way you curate your space is completely up to you. This is a beautiful euro from an Asian collection. Now again, as you can see, details and resolution of the models are really, really nice. I should have slightly lifted my hands, apologies. You can't always see it as well. But again, just to showcase how easy, you just drop it, adjust the size, and again, plump it where you'd like. And there you have your little basic display. Now you can also add from local. I wanted just to showcase that as well. So all you will have to click is add from local, go to your location in your own computer of where you've saved them. Now this was just on my desktop. All you have to click is add, and there we go. So these are Van Gogh's irises. So you can also have paintings in there. Again, you can adjust size, have a look at it up close, and then decide on where you'd like to put it. Now it's a painting. I place it against the wall, but again, it's virtual reality. You can place it wherever you like. You have the option to and then also adjust the frame. I toggled it off because I thought it looked a bit nicer, and then you just save it, and that's it. Basically, and as you can see, you get really up close and personal. Yes, and that is it. 2 minutes and you already have your little display there. Now all of our assets come with associated audio and text, so all object descriptions are there. Now it's completely up to you what information you add. So in the story, as I was saying, that you want to tell is completely up to you. You can also have videos in there, other audio narration, PowerPoint, websites, anything that tickles your fancy. And there you go. All you have to do is save. And that is your mini exhibit done. There we go. And I think that is all from me. I think I'm going to stop sharing for now, and I'll let Gabby take back over.
Great. I mean, that was really great. Well, thank you both very much for the presentations and the introduction. That was great. I mean, my initial comment is just going to be, just because it's the last thing we've seen, that I'm really pleased to see that interface. We very much enjoyed visiting the Unbox a couple of weeks ago, where we met. But I'm really pleased there to have seen the creator interface, which is something that we didn't get from that experience. And that's really nice to be able to see just how, as you say, just how very user friendly it is from even from the creator's point of view. So that's
yeah, absolutely. So we always talk about it like PowerPoint, and initially at the beginning of the project that doesn't sit so well with me. But to be very honest, it is though. It's really this click and drop. Yes, it will take an initial, minute to get used to it, but after all, you just completely, up to you how you customize it, and it's really quite straightforward. Now, because it is cross-platform, what I do usually is build in my desktop first, so I upload everything, put it kind of roughly where I want it to be, and then go in with the headsets and doing the fine-tuning itself. But yes, the idea is that anyone can really do it, and that is really true.
Fantastic. Cool, thank you. We should also say that the floor is now open for anybody anybody watching on YouTube live. Please do use the live chat to ask questions. But I know YouTube has a few seconds delay, so there may we will see any comments a few moments after you leave them. But so yeah, I mean, in the meantime, I don't know. Do either of you have any questions for each other, or comments?
Not really. There's only something I would like to add is I don't know about your different experiences with VR, but it's always interesting to have someone guide you at first, especially when you're trying it for the first time. So especially with the museums in the Metaverse project, I mean, that was my first experience with you, Lynn, guiding us through not only the technicalities of using the VR headset, but also the project itself, and the goals of the project. And so you get the whole theoretical background behind it as well. And that gives you more tools to basically explore it by yourself, maybe a bit later. But I think having guidance at first is always very, very useful. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, we just see, from your own work, that there's a lot of skill really that goes in, and everything, every time you use a different app or a different platform, there's always going to be a bit of time until you get used to it, right? So obviously you had me there, which is nice, and that is something, but obviously eventually that will not be possible. So we are currently working on a tutorial that does guide people, through the basic controls, etc. And then it will be basically also, a visitor mode that is slightly more basic, if you will, and then also the creator mode that is obviously going to be slightly more in depth. But that is something that we are in the process of developing now, because that is an important thing, especially if you don't have anyone there who can talk you through all of these things at all the time.
Yeah, the goal, of course, always is to have something that is so intuitive that someone can turn it on and figure it out, or at least if there's tutorial materials there, they will figure it out for themselves.
Yes.
And it's a sign of how complete or how mature something is how much that sort of guidance is needed. I mean, yes, you had a bit of a pointer, okay, click this to move, and then use this button to pick up an object and this button to put it down again. Those sorts of things, which you would figure out on your own eventually, but it's useful to have been told that. Saved us figuring that out. I've been in very much sort of in progress VR environments where people were walking through, and it was very much a stage of sort of 5 minutes in. It's like, oh yes, we haven't finished this bit yet, so the only way you can pick this up is if you step left one place and then click the third button, and then it'll pick up. And if it's like that, it's because it's not finished, right? So the fact that things are relatively smooth, and there's no point when wandering through it, if you accidentally press the left button, you will exit the program. That sort of thing. That's a good sign, right? That it's ready to
absolutely play. But as I was saying, we've done a lot of demos now, a lot of stress testing, and yes, it can be. When I say stress testing, it's stress involved for everyone, right? I mean, it gets quite intense at points, but that is why it's there. It's a research project, so it's what it is. But yeah, no, we're really proud of what we came up with, and this is really a fun platform to also, for instance, all the models that Juliette was talking about, if it were possible to integrate those, that would be really fun, because the next thing that we're going to be exploring is not just having the 3D assets as in manageable objects, but also environments where the environment itself becomes the object, and you can really, walk through them and then contextualize the actual artifacts within these spaces. And I think so putting these things together would be quite an exciting avenue to explore.
I sort of want to ask a little bit about the I don't want to ask about the pricing, per se, because I know this isn't the venue for it to sort of say you get this for £100, this for £1,000 or whatever. But a bit about what sorts of people you expect to see using this. Presumably, there's some sort of situation where a large organization would be using it, would have a certain sort of pricing scheme, an individual using it, an educational environment, those sorts of things would have slightly different. I don't know how much of that you want to talk about, but if there's any sort of basics on that front that we could touch on.
Absolutely. I mean, I have colleagues who work specifically just on that side of the thing, so they would be definitely better placed to answer this question. But it will be available. So a lot of the research that we've been doing, or that they've been doing specifically, is into this willingness to pay. And we know that we found that we've done some studies at the beginning, and MIM, or Museums in the Metaverse, was quite basic, and people were like, oh, okay, I'm not sure if I would pay for this. And then we went 2 years down the line and we said, okay, and we see that rise exponentially, so that you can really see. So we found that people are willing to spend around between £5 and £20, for about a 15 to 30 minute experience. So we are considering potentially subscription-based access for visitors, right? That depends obviously on who creates the experience. So if a Met Museum, it will still be up to them on how much they would charge for this, but that is something that we'll be looking at. Now, for our cultural heritage partners, again, that is slightly more difficult on really to narrow down on how they're going to be pricing. But you will have the opportunity, for instance, to use the platform for free. But if you want an unbox like that, you would have to obviously rent it, and that is where it might be slightly more pricey. So I can't put a specific price on it, but we have calculated that if the unbox is used 30% of the time, okay, so that is about 5 people per hour, you will profit from having it. And I mean, 5 people per hour from the thousands of demos I've done is not a problem. It's obviously, maybe it's the initial engagement is very high, and the main issue, or the main negative that we get is like, oh, I want to stay longer. Obviously, I want to stay in VR longer. That is, for us, that is music to my ears, which is great. Yeah. But that is not the
You had to kick us out, I remember.
But the reality is that how do we get repeat customers, right? So how can we make this sustainable for our partners? And that is why it is so important that we create, with Museums in Metaverse, a sustainable ecosystem that you make experiences, you generate some income, you funnel that income into your own digitization, get more models again, and then we provide something that goes around and around and around, and that is something that you can keep up for long term. Because we all know, I was talking, kits, it fails, it breaks, people drop stuff, you have to calculate that in, so it is a pricey undertaking, but definitely it's a mad uptake and engagement. So
I mean, it strikes me, and I'm speaking as someone whose engagement with VR is almost entirely through education, that this would also be a really cool environment for students to practice in.
Absolutely.
And that's the sort of, so museums we know aren't wealthy, but they do have incomes and outcomes, and they have budgets and whatever. Educational institutions, except for a few very wealthy universities, have zero budget. If I ask my university for, even a modest amount of money to have access to, this environment to use with my students, the answer would be no, because, it's just not so. And I don't know, given that this isn't your sort of core audience, it would be completely acceptable if your answer was tough. But I wonder if there's any thought about, having access to it as a sort of sandbox environment, as a testing environment, no hardware involved, but you through the more fully online environment.
So schools, especially even schools, universities. So I think this entire idea of XR for education is something that especially we take very seriously, and that is a very big area that we are exploring. That is something we see at Glasgow now specifically. We are really trying to kind of increase and cement Glasgow and the UK itself, as a very much of a center of 3D content generation, so to make this part of what we offer our students. And MIM is a very important stepping stone, a key pillar in that. Now, exactly on how we will be able to provide that is something that I am not entirely privy to the discussions as of yet.
Mhm.
What I know and what I would like to see is that all the teaching we already do using MIM and VR and XR more widely here on campus is something that could be done across the UK and beyond, because we use it so much all the time. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students who walk through the door every year, and we use MIM for various teaching. We use it for teaching for Scottish literature. We use it for exhibition design. We use it for medicine, for biology. So that is the uptake is really, really broad, and the possibilities endless. But it gets to the point where we have to kind of find some agreement on how we make that available.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Brilliant. No, I'm delighted that you're thinking about it anyway. So yeah, so it's not off the table. Yeah, great.
No, not absolutely not. And I think even for not public schools, younger pupils and stuff, for
Mhm, mhm.
delivering something that is much more curriculum based, and you say
Yeah.
like something very much hands on, and rather than you use PowerPoint, you now use your little tablet, and that is something we can provide. So Glasgow Uni and Museums in the Metaverse at this stage is very much privileged in that we have
Mhm.
that funding to provide these services. Once MIM as such comes to an end, and it's becoming its own spin out company, on how long we can take that up on, there's obviously a bit more of a compromise needed, but that is something that hopefully we will be able to work out favorably for all the parties involved.
Yeah, great. Yeah. No, I mean, this is such an exciting project. I'm very looking forward to seeing how that
Yeah, thank you so much.
cool. Okay. I might also, while we're here, and no one has yet left a question in the chat,
Mhm.
but I know a lot of people watch this asynchronously. But a question for Juliette about your. So you mentioned that you're doing this, what is basically an archaeology project,
Yes.
as your research project about how people used these sorts of spaces, and that your VR environments that you're building are a way to explore some of those questions, a way to communicate some of those questions. I wonder if you had any thoughts about how you're going to integrate that with what is a thesis on paper, as it were. I mean, PDF, not paper, but you know what I mean. It's in text. If you had thoughts about how the two would fit together.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question actually. I wasn't planning on making VR, the sole aim of my thesis. More like a tool to try and compare sort of like people's behaviors and interactions with ancient architecture, if we can, because I have been using cognitive and sensory archaeology as well to explore how ancient buildings would have influenced people's perception and experience of religious cults. So religious behaviors, also anything related to ancient cults. So it goes from social interactions, sacrifices, anything related to the worship of the Greco-Egyptian gods. Now, I think the interest with VR is to also see people's reaction to the very first reaction that you can have to architecture, and where you tend to go. And I think that also tells us a lot about what people would have done in ancient Greece as well, in Hellenistic times, because it is a human reaction as well. And even if the reality is quite different, I think it's important to try and compare and contrast both sides. So I wanted to do that as well. Now, the main focus of my thesis, the main tool, is the 3D reconstructions of the sites I have been studying, along with visibility and movement analysis with GIS, which is not completely VR, but it's still related. So I think it's a way of trying to complete the sort of the study on experience and interactions with the built environment. And yeah, I think using VR also forces us to build models that are as accurate as possible, and it forces us to be as detailed as possible, and to wonder, where everything is in a sanctuary. It sounds like a very basic question, but when you have a massive sanctuary where everything cannot be necessarily located, there can be interpretation as well. And it's also very interesting to wonder where, the things that were found on site could have been initially. And I think VR also takes part in that. So I will try to sort of like develop that in more detail. I would like to have models as detailed as possible. It's not the main point of my thesis, VR, unfortunately. I wish, but I think it's a very, very good tool to try and experience it yourself and see how your experience could have contrasted or compared to people's experiences in ancient times.
Yes,
So yeah.
yes, absolutely. So my follow-up question then, given that you've given a very convincing answer to that, and I should be clear, I'm not trying to quiz you on your thesis. I'm trying to draw out answers that are useful for our students to think about. Is that given that these VR environments and 3D environments and other digital methods that you're using will be a part of your research process and will be part of your decision making and conclusion drawing process, that's something, therefore, that needs to be communicated to your readers, examiners in the first instance, but readers of the work when it's published eventually as well. And so have you thought about how you would be documenting some of that stuff, how you would be, making the VR environments available to people who are holding a paper book in their hands or even an ebook? Or I mean, again, this is sort of a question to sort of, for students who might be thinking about this sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I have been thinking about it since the beginning, really, of my research. This is an ongoing reflection, to be honest. In terms of VR, I don't think that can be made accessible to everyone, purely because of, the logistics of it, sadly. But in terms of 3D models, I was thinking of using, the platforms, but I need the separate authorizations, and copyrights as well. So that will be something, down the line, obviously, because I would like, if I can, I would like to make it accessible as much as possible, because I think it would just be a shame to just integrate screenshot into the book and not make it, fully operable, and fully interactive. So you might as well try to, I think I will try, definitely. I will see what's possible, what's not. But platforms like Sketchfab, for instance, they're brilliant for that. Now the question is, what will I be able to put on Sketchfab, and how accessible will it be, in terms of copyrights, in terms of the size of the models as well. And there's also something that I would have liked to do, is sort of because I will be recording the visibility and movement analysis I'll be doing, using ArcGIS and other GIS software. My other question is, how do I make that accessible? Can I make it interactive in any way? Can I sort of like imitate it in 3D modeling software? That's also a question that's been in my mind for some time now. So we'll see. But I think it is a process that has to be separate but integrated to my thesis, as it is not the main problem with my thesis, but still a very important tool. So we'll see how it goes. But I've been thinking about it, and I want to try to make it as accessible as possible, given the circumstances. So we'll see.
Yeah, which I think is, this is the issue with anyone using digital methods as part of the research process in an otherwise traditional project, is how do you make that as transparent as your footnoted arguments are?
Exactly.
That is the question.
Yeah.
And we talked last week about.
So we'll see how it goes.
We talked all semester about the importance of documentation. So these are questions that we've addressed before. I know this. I'm saying this more as a joke than as anything else. But I mentioned your work, Juliette, briefly to Fergus, Lynn's colleague in Glasgow, when I met him in December, and he said she should be doing that in museums in the metaverse. The environment is exactly does exactly what you need.
Similar.
Yeah,
it's quite similar. Yeah, with archaeological sites. If you want to expand.
Yeah, always.
But yeah, no, yeah, it is quite similar. It is the same methodology, if I can say so. Yeah, it's it's very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. But presumably this is the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of one.
Yes,
I hope so.
I think it's
for sure.
the end of this session now, unless either of you have any other final comments or questions you wanted to make.
Not at
No,
this
wait.
stage.
Yes, I do have a question
Oh.
for Lynn, actually. Because you mentioned you had 13 different environments for the museums in the metaverse.
Yes.
How were they chosen? How were they designed? To have specific types, and are you going to have more in the future?
Yes.
Or
So
yeah.
yes, so the idea we are currently actually so my colleagues on the technical work package, they're very much well, they're focusing on their 3D asset creation, but they're also environment specialists. For the environments we have, though, those were subcontracted to both to two Glasgow based firms, so that was Float and Lateral North. And the first brief that we had given to them was to create something that is very much in keeping with public imaginations of what museums would look like. So that is much more, I don't want to say generic, but potentially more westernized ideas of what we associated with the museum. The second round was completely the opposite, to come up with about 3 or 4 sets of environments that would completely break with any traditional forms of thinking about a museum. So we have underwater stuff, we have space station, we have a red planet, so something that completely breaks the idea of what a traditional museum would be, because why not? It's VR, right? So you can put your stuff anywhere and wherever you like. So we now have quite a variety of things. We have a tower in the sky, so it's really is completely limitless. What we've also been doing, and that was initial phase when we were working with Historical Environment Scotland, because they have quite a lot of their sites also, digitized. Obviously, I mean, that is the main things they do in terms of conservation preservation, that we try to use those as environments as well. So currently, the way they work is that they become little assets in themselves. So you can look at them and you can hold entire, for instance, like Lithgow Palace in your hand or Edinburgh Castle in your hand. But we haven't as much spent time now on actually, making those walkable. Right. So I think that is something that in the next phase we're going to hope to do, because that is one of the main things that we get also from our cultural heritage partners is this idea of recontextualization. I want to be at the Antonine Wall and I want to have these 20 Roman artifacts that we have scanned, but I want to have them in situ, and that is something where I think where it gets really exciting. That is something where I'm like, this is where the superpower of VR comes in, this time travel element. Again, we need to tread very carefully, and I think you put that beautifully, in terms of construction, reconstruction, replication, transformation, so you have to be very careful on how you approach these things, be very sensitive in how you do it, especially depending on what collections you're working with. But I think that is where it's going to be next, and that is why I'm really super duper excited for that.
That sounds very interesting. Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I want to wander around the space station.
I know. Well, next time you visit Glasgow, we'll do on the space station.
I want the space station to be 0G, because so one of the first VR games I ever played was one around the International Space Station, and it was 0G, so there was no up or down. You basically were in whatever direction you were, and I assumed, knowing that VR can make you nauseous, that wandering around in 0G would be the most nauseating experience possible, because real 0G is, right? I mean, people go into 0G, it takes them a couple of days to stop vomiting everywhere. But actually being in VR in 0G was completely intuitive. I mean, it felt no problem at all.
Oh, well.
So I don't know what that was about, but anyway. Yeah. No, this I mean, fun is one thing. Obviously fun is important, but I think these can be really useful for for the different kinds of exhibits you're talking about, and also sometimes for very sort of alienating exhibits. Show some Egyptian antiquities in the space station. Show some postmodernist art in in the Parthenon or whatever, and have these things very very different.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach.
No, for
sure.
Great. Well, thank you both very, very much again. This has been absolutely fabulous.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Great, and thanks everyone for watching, and see you next semester. So we're